My wife, Eleanor, had been gone for 3 days, but the house still held her scent. Not perfume, but something more fundamental. Lavender from the soap she kept by the sink, the faint, sweet smell of the wood polish she used on the mantelpiece, and the lingering aroma of the sourdough starter she'd kept alive for 20 years. I sat in her favorite armchair, the one with the worn arms, wearing the heavy wool coat I'd worn to her funeral. I didn't take it off. Its weight was a comfort, a placeholder for the gravity of my grief. Just 3 days after we buried her, with the earth still new on her grave, my son Kevin called. He didn't ask how I was. He skipped the condolences and went straight for the kill. "Dad, we need to talk about the house," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth, polished to the smooth, hard finish of a real estate agent closing a deal. "The market in the Blue Ridge is peaking. We could get a fantastic price for it right now. It's time to sell." I didn't mention the second house she'd left me in Savannah. I didn't mention the $520,000 in bonds hidden in a bank account he knew nothing about. I just listened. A week later, he called again, impatient. "Start packing, Dad. The house is sold." I almost laughed. Oh, I had already packed, but Before I tell you how this all unfolded, do me a favor. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, what city, what state, or what country. It's comforting to know who's out there listening. What time is it where you are? Here, in my memory, it was a cold, gray morning, and my world was about to get a whole lot colder. My daughter, Sarah, called 3 days after Kevin. Same tone, different packaging. She worked in public relations, and her voice was a carefully curated performance of empathy. "Dad, we've been so worried about you rattling around in that big house all alone. It's too much for you to maintain. I fixed up the basement apartment for you. It's cozy and you'll be right here with us. We can get a great offer for the house." 1 week, 2 calls, both of them talking about my home, our home, as if I were already gone, as if my life was just a final asset to be liquidated. They weren't cruel children, not in the obvious way. Cruelty you can fight. This was something more insidious. It was practicality weaponized. They had spreadsheets where their hearts should be. They spoke of equity and market value, and they believed their pragmatism was a kindness. Perhaps it is when you're in your 30s and every decision is about accelerating towards the next goal. But I'm 67. At my age, you understand that some things, the most important things, are meant to resist acceleration. A home, a marriage, a garden that takes a decade to learn the shape of your hands. I didn't argue. I just looked out the window at the mist clinging to the mountains and thought, "You have no idea what game you've just started, Eleanor." Because hidden in this house, in a small oak box she left for me, was a secret that would shatter their plans and change all of our lives forever. They saw a property to be sold. I saw the foundation Eleanor had left for me to stand on, and I had no intention of moving. What they mistook for grief-stricken silence was actually the quiet resolve of a man getting ready for a fight. They had just declared war on my past, and I was about to use the future Eleanor had secretly built for us as my defense. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing waltz with memory. Every object in the house whispered her name. The chipped coffee mug she refused to throw away because, she'd said, "It's earned its scars, Arthur, just like us." The stack of worn-out gardening books by the back door. The faint pencil marks on the doorframe measuring our granddaughter Chloe's height through the years. My children's calls had tainted these sacred spaces. Their words echoed in the quiet hallways, turning relics of love into inventory for a future estate sale. This wasn't a new development, I realized, with a heavy heart. It was just the final, unmasked version of a philosophy they'd been living for years. I remembered Christmas, 5 years ago. I had spent weeks in my workshop carving a detailed model of the lake where Eleanor and I had our first date. I presented it to Kevin, proud of my work. He smiled, a quick, dismissive flash of teeth. "Thanks, Dad. This is, quaint. You know, a gift card for that new tech gadget would have been more practical." Sarah was the same. For her 30th birthday, Eleanor had spent months creating a beautiful scrapbook, a tangible history of her daughter's life. Sarah had flipped through it quickly and said, "Oh, Mom, this is so sweet. But you know I've digitized all my photos. This will just take up space." They measured love in square footage and dollar signs. They saw memories not as anchors, but as clutter. But the new level of their planning was what truly chilled me.
A few days after her first call, Sarah rang again. "Dad, I know you're overwhelmed. How about I come up this weekend and help you start sorting through Mom's things? We can go through her paperwork, see what needs to be handled. It'll be a huge weight off your shoulders." Her voice was like honey laced with poison. It wasn't an offer of help. It was a reconnaissance mission. She wanted to get her hands on the will, the insurance policies, the bank statements. She was looking for the financial map of my life so she could redraw the borders to her liking. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart," I said, my own voice calm, a placid lake over a raging current. "But I'm not ready to disturb her things just yet. I need to do it in my own time." The disappointment in her voice was a tangible thing. "Well, okay, Dad, but don't wait too long. These things have deadlines." Deadlines? My grief had a deadline. My life had an expiration date they were eager to stamp. That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself in Eleanor's small office, a room that always smelled of old books and dried roses. I ran my hand along her oak desk, a nervous habit. My fingers brushed against a loose floorboard beneath it, one I'd always meant to fix. On a whim, I pried it up, and there, nestled in the dark space between the joists, was a small, flat oak box. It wasn't dusty. She had put it there recently. With trembling hands, I lifted it out. It was light. The lid wasn't locked. What I found inside confirmed every dark suspicion I had, but it also armed me for the battle that came. The air in the office felt thick, charged with the energy of a long-held secret. I lifted the lid of the oak box. There was no treasure inside, not in the way Kevin or Sarah would understand it. There was a single, sealed envelope made of heavy cream-colored paper. Beside it lay a heavy, old-fashioned brass key tied with a simple red ribbon.
And beneath that, a passbook for a savings and loan in Savannah, Georgia, a bank I'd never heard of, in a name I didn't recognize. My name was on the account, too, as a joint holder. Arthur Miller. Eleanor must have set it up years ago. On the envelope, in her elegant, decisive script, were the words that would become my mantra. For my Arthur, open when you know why. I didn't know the specific why she meant, but a general, horrifying why was taking shape. My children saw me as an obstacle, a problem to be managed. This box was Eleanor's solution. It was her voice from beyond the grave telling me to fight. I didn't open the letter, not yet. The timing had to be perfect. Holding the cold brass key in my palm, I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't just a grieving old man. I was a husband carrying out his wife's final wishes. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, an old friend named David Chen. David was sharp, loyal, and had the quiet tenacity of a bulldog. "David, it's Arthur," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in days. "I think we're going to have a problem with Kevin and Sarah." "I'm not surprised, Arthur," he said grimly. "What's on your mind?" "I'm not selling the house," I said. "Not now, not ever, unless I choose to. I need you to be ready." "I'm always ready," he replied. "Just tell me when." Before I could even begin to formulate a plan, the doorbell rang. It was a delivery truck. The driver, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, unloaded a large, ominous box and a metal-framed bed. A hospital bed. On the shipping label, a note. "Courtesy of Kevin and Sarah Miller to make your final days more comfortable." My blood ran cold. This wasn't a gift. This was a statement. It was a prop for the stage play they were creating, the one where I was a frail, incompetent old man who couldn't be trusted with his own life. They weren't just trying to sell my house. They were trying to build a cage around me, and this was the first bar. I stood there on my own porch looking at a hospital bed I didn't need, delivered by my own children. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. Have you ever been made to feel powerless by the very people who should be protecting you? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in that moment? Because what I did next, they never saw coming. Rage,
cold and pure, washed over me. It burned away the fog of grief and left behind a core of pure, unyielding steel. This was not concern. This was an act of psychological warfare. They were trying to define my reality, to paint a picture of helplessness for the world and for the courts to see. I turned to the delivery driver, who was waiting for a signature. I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "Take it back." "Sir, I can't. The delivery is paid for." "I am refusing the delivery," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Load it back on your truck, now." Something in my expression must have convinced him. He and his partner loaded the bed and the box back onto the truck without another word. As it drove away, I felt like I had won a small skirmish, but the war was just beginning. I walked back inside, my mind racing. They wanted to treat me like a relic? Fine. It was time to return some relics of their own. I spent the rest of the day on a mission. I climbed the rickety ladder to the attic, a space I hadn't entered in years. It was a museum of forgotten childhoods, and I was the curator, preparing for the final D-Act session. I found them easily. 2 large plastic totes, one labeled Kevin and the other Sarah, in my own faded handwriting. I dragged them downstairs and opened them on the dining room table. Kevin's was a shrine to a boy who peaked in high school, his varsity jacket smelling faintly of cheap cologne and faded glory. A box of baseball trophies, now tarnished. A collection of video games he'd once sworn were investments. Sarah's was filled with the artifacts of a girl who was always auditioning for a different life. Old ballet slippers, a stack of dramatic teenage diaries filled with angst, a portfolio of art projects she'd abandoned. These weren't memories anymore. They were burdens. They were the physical proof that they had moved on from this house, from our life, long ago. I packed them all into fresh cardboard boxes. I didn't do it angrily. I did it with the meticulous precision of an engineer decommissioning a bridge. This was a structural change. For each of them, I wrote a short, simple note on plain white paper. For Kevin, this belongs to you. I am keeping what belongs to me. For Sarah, you left this behind. I can no longer be its caretaker. I called a local courier service, one that specialized in fragile priority deliveries. I have 2 boxes, I told the dispatcher, one for Charlotte, one for Atlanta. I need them delivered to the door tomorrow morning. I need a signature. As the courier's van pulled away from my house the next morning, carrying away the ghosts of the children I once knew, the house felt lighter. The silence was no longer empty. It was clean. It was potential. The board was set. My move was made. And then my phone rang. It was Kevin. His voice was a low growl, vibrating with fury. "What the hell did you just send me, Dad?" "I sent you what was yours, Kevin," I said calmly, picturing him standing in his sterile, minimalist apartment, surrounded by the sentimental clutter of a past he was desperate to escape. "My junk? You sent me my childhood junk? What is this, some kind of petty game?" he spat. "It's not a game. It's a clarification," I replied, the words feeling solid and true in my mouth. "This house is not a storage unit for the person you used to be. You want to liquidate assets? I've just liquidated some of mine. Those things are your responsibility now." There was a choked sound on the other end of the line, a mix of disbelief and rage. "You think this changes anything? You're still an old man in a big house you can't handle." "I'm the owner of this house," I said, my voice hardening. "And that's the only detail that matters. Don't call me again unless you understand that." I hung up before he could respond. Sarah's call came an hour later. She was crying. "Dad, why would you do that? It was so hurtful." "Was it hurtful, Sarah?" Or just inconvenient. You've had 20 years to come and get your things. You chose not to. That choice has a consequence. The conversation ended with her sobbing that I didn't understand. Oh, I understood perfectly. I understood that they had fired their first shots and I had just returned fire. I thought that would be the end of it for a little while. I was wrong. The next escalation came 2 days later, and it was far more dangerous. I was at the local grocery store, the one I've shopped at for 40 years. I got to the checkout, loaded my items onto the belt, and when the total came up, I handed Margaret, the cashier, my debit card. She swiped it. A moment passed. She swiped it again. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she said, her face filled with concern. "It's declining."
I frowned. "That's impossible. Try it again." She did. Declined. A flush of heat crept up my neck. People in line behind me were starting to shift impatiently. I pulled out a credit card. Declined. My heart started to pound. Humiliated, I fumbled for the cash in my wallet, paid for my groceries, and walked out to my truck, my hands shaking. As soon as I got inside, I called my bank. I was put on hold, then transferred. Finally, a nervous young manager got on the line. "Mr. Miller, yes, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. We had to place a temporary security freeze on your accounts." "A freeze? On what grounds?" I demanded. He cleared his throat. "Well, sir, we received a call from your son, Mr. Kevin Miller. He's listed as one of your emergency contacts. He expressed concern that you might be experiencing some cognitive difficulties and that there was unusual financial activity. For your protection, we felt it was prudent to—" "For my protection?" I roared, cutting him off. "You froze my assets based on a phone call from the very person who was trying to force me to sell my home? Do you have any idea what you've just done?" The manager stammered an apology, but the damage was done. This was their new tactic. If they couldn't convince me, they would cripple me. They would strip me of my financial independence, paint me as senile and incompetent, and seize control. Sitting there in my old pickup truck, the scent of pine and motor oil around me, I felt a terror I hadn't felt in years. They weren't just coming for my house anymore, they were coming for my life. The bank eventually lifted the freeze after a furious call from my lawyer, David, but the incident left a scar. The feeling of public humiliation, of being treated like a child, was something I couldn't shake. My children had shown their hand. They weren't just being greedy, they were being ruthless. They were willing to burn down my life to get what they wanted. That evening, I sat in my study, the oak box on the desk in front of me. The time for waiting was over. The why Eleanor had written about was screaming in my ears. It was the why of betrayal, the why of a fight for one's own dignity. But before I could even reach for the letter, they made their next move. It was subtler this time, more insidious. The doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a woman in her 50s, dressed in a sensible pantsuit, holding a clipboard. Her smile was professionally gentle. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "my name is Janice Riley. I'm a geriatric care consultant. Your daughter, Sarah, hired me to conduct a simple home wellness assessment, just to make sure you have everything you need. May I come in?" My internal alarms went off. Sarah hadn't mentioned this. A geriatric care consultant? It sounded like something she would cook up. I knew I should refuse, but a part of me was morbidly curious to see how far they would go. I stepped aside and let her in, my hospitality a mask for my suspicion. She walked through my home, her eyes scanning everything, not with the warmth of a guest, but with the cool appraisal of an inspector. She noted the worn rug in the hallway, the slight tremor in my hand as I poured her a glass of water, the fact that I had to squint to read the label on a medicine bottle. Her questions were a masterclass in veiled interrogation. "Do you ever forget to take your medication, Arthur? How often do you have visitors? It must get lonely up here. This is a big house for one person. Do you ever worry about falling when no one is around?"
She was building a case. Every observation, every answer was a brick in the wall they were constructing around me, a wall that would prove I was unfit to live on my own. I played along, answering her questions with a folksy, slightly forgetful charm. I made myself seem a little more tired, a little more confused than I was. I let her see what she wanted to see, what she was paid to see. When she finally left an hour later, leaving behind a brochure for assisted living facilities, I felt disgusted. The invasion of my privacy was absolute. They had sent a stranger, a spy, into my home to document my perceived failings. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to collect ammunition for a legal battle. They were trying to build a case for guardianship. I walked straight to the phone and called David. They sent someone, David, a consultant. She was here for an hour taking notes. I'm not surprised, he said, his voice grim. This is the next step. They're trying to manufacture evidence of incompetence. Don't worry, Artha. Let them. Let them build their case on sand. We're about to hit them with a rock. After I hung up, I strode to my desk. No more waiting, no more reacting. It was time to act. With a steady hand, I picked up the heavy, cream-colored envelope from the oak box. I knew why. Eleanor had known this day would come. She knew her children, and she had prepared me for it. I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out the letter that would change everything. The paper felt heavy in my hands, each word a testament to Eleanor's foresight and love. My dearest Arthur, it began, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to guard your flank, and it means our children have forgotten who you are. Do not let them. They will speak of practicality and responsibility, but what they mean is control. They have forgotten that you are the foundation upon which their entire lives were built. And foundations, my love, do not beg to be kept. They decide what gets to stay. My eyes blurred with tears. She knew. She had seen the hardness in them long before I was willing to admit it. The letter went on to detail everything. The second house, a beautiful, historic townhome she'd bought years ago in the heart of Savannah, Georgia, a city we'd always dreamed of retiring to. It was fully paid for and solely in my name. The passbook was for a savings account holding over $520,000 in municipal bonds, a quiet nest egg we had built together, invisible to the world. This is not a weapon, Arthur. It is a shield. It is a new beginning should you need one. Live your life on your own terms. You have earned it. All my love, forever. Eleanor. I folded the letter, a surge of power and purpose flowing through me. This wasn't just about defiance anymore. It was about honoring her legacy. The next day, I was in David Chen's office. An hour later, he had drafted the documents. The following morning, we met them at a neutral site, a sterile conference room at a mediation center downtown. Kevin and Sarah came in with their lawyer, a slick young man named Caldwell, who oozed false confidence. They looked like a corporate raiding party. David let him finish. Then he calmly slid a document across the table. This is a legally binding notice of non-representation. My client has not authorized any agent, broker, or family member to list or market his property. Any further attempts to do so will be met with a lawsuit for tortious interference.
Caldwell's smile faltered. We are simply exploring options given the circumstances. What circumstances? David interrupted, sliding a second document over. Are you referring to the ones detailed in this signed and notarized statement of competency from Dr. Matthews, my client's physician for the last 20 years? It confirms his excellent physical and mental health? Or perhaps you mean the circumstances detailed in this official complaint we filed with his bank regarding fraudulent attempts to restrict his financial freedom. Kevin's face went pale. Sarah stared at her hands. Their lawyer was speechless. And finally, David said, his voice like ice, placing a third document on the table. This is a cease and desist letter, addressed to your geriatric care consultant, Miss Riley, warning her against practicing medicine without a license and illegal surveillance. A copy has been sent to the state licensing board. He paused, letting the weight of the words fill the room. Now, would you like to continue discussing my client's well-being?
Or shall we conclude this meeting? The silence was deafening. Their meticulously built case had crumbled to dust in under 5 minutes. They had brought a knife to a gunfight, and Eleanor had provided me with a cannon. Their lawyer, Caldwell, was the first to recover, though his composure was visibly shaken. He shuffled his papers, avoiding eye contact with his clients. Clearly, he began, clearing his throat, there has been a misunderstanding of intentions. My clients were acting out of what they perceived as familial concern. Concern, David repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. Is that what you call trying to freeze your father's bank account? Or sending an unlicensed investigator into his home under false pretenses? The courts, Mr. Caldwell, usually have a different word for it. It's called elder abuse. The term hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Kevin shot up from his chair, his face flushed with anger. That's a lie. We were just trying to help. Help, I spoke for the first time, my voice low and steady, cutting through his outburst. You call a hospital bed help, Kevin? You call trying to take away my ability to buy my own groceries help? You don't know the meaning of the word. My gaze shifted to Sarah. She wouldn't look at me. Her shoulders were shaking, and I realized with a start that she was crying, silent tears tracing paths down her professionally made-up face. She slowly reached out and closed the file folder in front of her. The soft click of the cardboard cover sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. It was a surrender. Kevin saw it too, his rage deflated, replaced by a look of bewildered defeat. He sank back into his chair. Their unity, their confident assault, was broken. David Chen, ever the professional, wrapped things up. Our position is clear. Arthur Miller is of sound mind and body, and will be making all decisions regarding his property and his life. Any further interference will be met with the full force of the law. This meeting is over. We stood up. As I walked towards the door, Sarah looked up at me, her eyes red and pleading. Dad, I'm so sorry. It wasn't a performance. For the first time in months, I heard my daughter's real voice. I just nodded, not ready to offer forgiveness, but willing to acknowledge the crack in her armor. A few days passed in blessed silence. Then a florist's van pulled up my long driveway. They delivered a large bouquet of white lilies, Eleanor's favorite. The card was small and simple. In Sarah's elegant handwriting, it said only, "I'm sorry, Dad. I was wrong." The next day, an email from Kevin appeared in my inbox. The subject line was blank. The body of the email had one sentence. I canceled the contract with the agent. It wasn't an apology, not by a long shot. It was a grudging admission of defeat. But it was something. It was a start. My granddaughter Chloe called that evening, her voice bright and full of life from her college dorm. Grandpa, Mom and Uncle Kevin are acting weird. They're quiet. Did something happen? I smiled, looking out at the mountains Eleanor and I had loved so much. You could say that, sweetheart, I said. You could say they finally learned that this old foundation is a lot stronger than they thought. The battle was over. The house was safe. But as I looked at the brass key from Eleanor's box, I knew my journey was just beginning. It was time to see what else she had left for me.
I sat down at the small kitchen table, the sunlight warming my back. A friend. Of course Eleanor had a friend here. She collected good people the way other people collect stamps. I made myself a cup of coffee and walked out into the walled garden. The air was still and warm. I touched the rough bark of the magnolia tree. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It wasn't the wild, rugged peace of my mountain home. It was a gentle, civilized peace. The peace of a place that has seen centuries come and go and has learned to be patient. That evening, Isabella came by. She was a woman in her late 60s with a cascade of silver hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and humor. She didn't offer condolences. She offered wine and a loaf of freshly baked bread. We sat in the garden as dusk fell, the sky turning a soft shade of violet. She loved this city. Isabella said, swirling the wine in her glass. She said it was a place that knew how to keep its secrets, but wasn't ashamed of its scars. A bit like her. I smiled. That was Eleanor. She told me about you, Isabella continued. She said you were a builder, a man who understood foundations. She knew you would understand this place. We talked for hours. I told her about Kevin and Sarah, about the hospital bed and the lawyer's office. She listened without judgment, just a sad, knowing look in her eyes. It was a relief to tell someone, to have my story witnessed by a kind stranger who had also known and loved my wife. The foundation was holding, and a new structure was starting to rise. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a horse-drawn carriage clattering on the cobblestones outside. The light in Savannah was different, softer, filtered through the thick canopy of the ancient oaks. I spent the day exploring my new neighborhood on foot, letting the city reveal itself to me slowly. I found Isabella's bookstore, a magical, cluttered place called The Faded Page, and bought a book of poetry. I sat in one of the city's famous squares, watching tourists and locals alike, feeling like a quiet observer of a play that had been running for centuries. Back at the townhouse, I finally delved into the rest of Eleanor's oak box. I opened the savings passbook. The balance, as she'd written, was over $520,000. It was a staggering amount, a testament to decades of quiet saving and smart conservative investing. For years, we had talked about this money as our future, a vague concept that I'd always assumed would be divided between Kevin and Sarah. But as I sat there in that sunlit kitchen, looking at their recent actions, a new clarity emerged. This money wasn't for them. They had shown me they couldn't be trusted with it. They would see it as a windfall, a solution to their self-inflicted financial problems, not as the legacy of a lifetime of hard work and careful planning. My mind drifted to my granddaughter, Chloe. She was 20, a bright, soulful young woman studying architecture at college. She had Eleanor's artistic spirit and my practical mind. I remembered the summer she was 16, when she'd spent a week with us at the mountain house. She had presented me with a detailed, hand-drawn plan to convert our old, dilapidated boathouse into an art studio for Eleanor. She'd measured everything herself, her notes precise, her vision clear. She saw potential where others saw decay. After Eleanor's funeral, while Kevin and Sarah were on their phones, likely calculating their inheritance, it was Chloe who had stayed behind. She had quietly helped me clear the dishes, her presence a silent comfort. Before she left, she had asked if she could take a small, chipped vase. It was Grandma's favorite, she whispered. I want something to remember her by that isn't perfect. Chloe understood. She understood the value of things that couldn't be bought or sold. She understood the difference between inheritance as an entitlement and inheritance as a stewardship. The decision settled in my heart with the weight of absolute certainty. The money was for Chloe. It was for her future, for her dreams, for the art studios and beautiful buildings she would one day create. It was the truest inheritance I could give her, a gift of freedom and opportunity, shielded from the grasping hands of her parents. I called David Chen the next day. David, I need you to do something for me. I want to set up an irrevocable trust. For Kevin and Sarah? No, I said, a smile spreading across my face for the first time in what felt like an eternity. It's for my granddaughter, Chloe, and I want it to be ironclad. I was no longer just defending my past. I was actively building the future just as Eleanor had intended. The foundation was secure, and now it was time to build something beautiful and lasting upon it. I had found my why. Tell me what you have in mind for this trust, Arthur, David said, his voice all business, but with an undercurrent of approval. I want it to be for Chloe and Chloe alone, I explained, pacing the floor of the Savannah townhouse. I want it to be a launch pad for her life, not a safety net for her parents' mistakes.
Enough for a degree, a business, a down payment on a home, but I want it protected. We can make it as specific as you like, Arthur. We can build a fortress around it. What are the conditions? We spent the next hour on the phone, hammering out the details. I felt like an engineer again, designing a structure meant to withstand any storm. Condition 1, the funds could never be used to settle debts, bail out a failing business, or co-sign a loan for any other family member, specifically her parents. The money was for her growth, not their rescue. Condition 2, to prevent the money from becoming a crutch, any withdrawal over a certain modest annual amount would require her to submit a formal proposal to a trustee, a business plan, an academic goal, a creative project. The trustee, a neutral third party David would help me appoint, would have the power to approve or deny the request based on the terms of the trust. This would encourage her to be thoughtful and strategic, not frivolous. Condition 3, and this was the most important. The exact value of the trust was to remain a secret, even from Chloe. Why the secrecy? David asked, intrigued. Because knowledge of a large sum of money can be a prison, David. I thought about Kevin's frantic greed. If she thinks it's an infinite well, she might never learn the value of her own work. If she thinks it's too small, she might be afraid to take risks. All she needs to know is that there is a foundation beneath her, one that will support her dreams if she is willing to build them herself. It's a trust fund, not a lottery winning. David was quiet for a moment. That's a very wise clause, Arthur. It's a clause Eleanor would have written.
A few days later, the documents were drafted. I signed them at a local notary's office in Savannah, the official stamp on the paper feeling like a final, definitive seal on my decision. Inside the main packet, I included a smaller, sealed envelope. It was a letter for Chloe, to be given to her by the trustee only when she turned 25. I didn't write about the money. I wrote about the boathouse she had designed, about her chipped vase, about her grandmother's belief that the most beautiful things are built with love and hard work, not just with money. I told her that we were entrusting her not with a sum of money, but with a legacy of quiet strength. I sealed the packet and sent it overnight to David's office. A huge weight lifted from my shoulders. It felt like I had finally closed a difficult chapter and could start a new one. Thank you all for sticking with my story this far. If you're still with me on this journey, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments so I know you're here. Your support means more than you know. Knowing that I had secured Chloe's future, I felt a sense of profound peace. But the story wasn't over. There was one more person who needed to be brought into this new world I was building. It was time to call Chloe. I waited until the afternoon when I knew Chloe would be between classes. I dialed her number, my heart beating a little faster. This wasn't just a phone call. It was an invitation. "Grandpa!" she answered, her voice a welcome burst of cheerful energy. "Are you okay? I haven't heard from you in a few days." "I'm better than okay, sweetheart. I'm somewhere warm, drinking coffee that tastes like it was brewed with sunshine." She laughed. "That sounds amazing. Where are you?" "I'm in a place your grandmother wanted me to see. A city she loved very much. Savannah." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Savannah? Wow. She always talked about the beautiful old houses there." "She did more than talk about them, Chloe. She bought one. And she left it to me." I could almost hear her mind racing. What? A whole house? Mom and Uncle Kevin don't know about this, do they?" "No," I said simply, "and that's for the best. Listen, the reason I'm calling, I know your spring break is coming up in a few weeks. How would you feel about changing your plans? Instead of going to the beach with your friends, how would you like to come and see your grandmother's secret house?" The silence on the other end of the line was filled with pure astonishment. "Are you serious, Grandpa? You mean come to Savannah to stay with you?" "Exactly like that," I said. "I think there's a lot here you would love. And frankly, I could use the company."
Yes, she shouted so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. 1,000 times yes. I'll book a flight right now. Oh, Grandpa, this is the best surprise ever. After we hung up, I walked out onto the iron balcony, looking down at the quiet street. The trust was for her future security, but this was for her soul. This was about connecting her to her grandmother in a way that went beyond memory. It was about showing her that life could hold beautiful, unexpected secrets, that there were other paths besides the one her parents were so desperately trying to pave with practicality and greed. I told her that we were entrusting her not with a sum of money, but with a legacy of quiet strength. A few days later, I received an email from David. He confirmed the trust was officially established and the trustee appointed. But he added a curious postscript. By the way, Arthur, I received a rather clumsy inquiry from a financial investigator asking about any recent large-scale asset transfers you might have made. I informed them, politely, that your estate planning is a private matter. Smells like your son to me. I laughed out loud. Of course it was Kevin. He must have been furious when he realized he couldn't touch my main accounts and had started digging, trying to see if I was hiding assets from him. He was looking for treasure, but he was looking in all the wrong places. He could hire a dozen investigators, but he would never find the fortress I had built around Chloe's future, because it wasn't just protected by law. It was protected by love and wisdom, two things his ledger sheets could never account for. He was playing checkers, while Eleanor had taught me how to play chess. And the checkmate was a quiet house in Savannah and a future secured for the one person who truly deserved it. The day Chloe was due to arrive, I felt a nervous excitement I hadn't felt since I was a young man waiting for Eleanor for our first date. I bought fresh flowers for the guest room and a new, plain white coffee mug, remembering Eleanor's advice to let the person decorate the welcome. My new friend, Isabella, stopped by that morning. She held a small, flat parcel wrapped in simple brown paper and twine. "This is for the girl," she said, her eyes soft. "From your Eleanor." She gave it to me a long time ago with very specific instructions. She placed the parcel in my hands. It was light, the shape of a book. "Give this to Chloe, but only when Arthur has stopped trying to carry the weight of the whole world on his own shoulders, not before." Isabella looked at me, a gentle smile on her face. "I think, my friend, you have finally set it down." I placed the parcel on the small table by the door, a silent welcome for my granddaughter. When I saw Chloe at the airport, my heart swelled. She ran to me, wrapping me in a hug that smelled of airplane soap and youthful optimism. On the drive back to the house, she was a whirlwind of questions, her architect's eye taking in every detail of the city's unique, beautiful angles. When we walked into the townhouse, she stopped, her eyes wide. "Oh, Grandpa, it's perfect. It feels like her." She explored every room with a sense of reverence and discovery. It wasn't until she came back downstairs that she noticed the parcel on the table. Her eyes met mine, asking a silent question. "From your grandmother," I said softly, "according to a schedule that wasn't mine." She sat at the table and slowly, carefully untied the twine. Inside was a simple, black, leather-bound notebook, the kind Eleanor always carried. Chloe opened it to the first page, in Eleanor's familiar, elegant script. It read, "My dearest Chloe, if you are reading this, it means your grandfather has done something brave. Remember, bravery most days looks like paying your bills on time and saying no at the right volume. I carried this notebook with me when I was your age, learning how to build a life that was my own. Now it is yours. Fill it with the things you refuse to shrink for. Fill it with blueprints for buildings that have never been seen. Fill it with truth. P.S. Always roll the lemons before you cut them. It wakes up the juice. This works on people too. All my love, Grandma."
Chloe didn't try to be brave. She let the tears come, tracing the ink with her fingertips as if she could feel the warmth of her grandmother's hand. She turned the page and found it wasn't blank. It was filled with Eleanor's lists, her small, fierce rules for living. Never buy shoes that apologize for your feet. If a man raises his voice to make a point, his point is probably weak. Plant rosemary where you can brush against it by accident. Chloe laughed through her tears. She was ruthless. She was accurate, I corrected gently. That afternoon, Chloe took the notebook and a pen out to the walled garden. I watched from the kitchen window as she sat under the magnolia tree, writing, filling the first blank page with her own thoughts. Later, as the sun began to set, she came back inside and looked at me, her eyes shining with a new resolve. "Grandpa," she said, tapping the notebook, "I think I know what I want to build first." "What's that, sweetheart?" I asked, turning from the sink where I was rinsing our coffee cups. She took a deep breath, the way someone does before they leap off a diving board. "I'm thinking about applying for a semester abroad. The university here in Savannah has one of the best historic preservation programs in the country. My advisor back at college said I'd be a fool not to consider it." She looked at me, waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting me to be disappointed that she'd be leaving so soon after arriving. But I just smiled. "Your advisor is a smart person." Relief washed over her face. "Really? You think it's a good idea?" "Chloe," I said, drying my hands and sitting down across from her, "your grandmother didn't leave this house here to be a museum. She left it to be lived in. She left it to be a starting point." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "There's a trust. Your grandmother and I set it up. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough to cover your tuition here, your living expenses, enough so you don't have to worry about anything but your work. It's yours, with no strings attached from anyone else." Her jaw dropped. She was speechless. The idea of the house was one thing, but this was a tangible tool, a foundation she could actually build on. "Grandpa, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just build something beautiful." That evening, we called her mother Sarah. I could tell Chloe was nervous. She put the phone on speaker, a small act of solidarity. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright. "Hi, Chloe, honey. How's Savannah? Is Grandpa taking care of you?" Sarah's voice was warm, but I could hear the familiar edge of parental anxiety. "It's amazing, and yes, he is. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I've made a decision. I'm going to apply to transfer here for a semester, maybe longer." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I braced myself for the objections, the talk of practicality, the thinly veiled attempts at control. But they didn't come. "Oh," Sarah said, her voice small. "Okay, is this because of us? Because of what happened with Grandpa?" Chloe's response was gentle, but firm. It was the voice of a young woman stepping into her own power. "No, Mom, this isn't about running away from something. It's about running towards something. It's what Grandma would have wanted. It's what I want." She paused, "And Grandpa has made it possible for me to do it without having to ask anyone for anything." The unspoken message was crystal clear. The financial leverage Sarah and Kevin had once tried to wield was gone. Chloe was independent. The silence stretched on, and then I heard a sound I hadn't heard from my daughter in years. A soft, resigned sigh that sounded like acceptance. "Okay, honey," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just send me pictures and be safe." After the call, Chloe let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for her entire life. She looked at me, her eyes gleaming with unshed tears and newfound freedom. "She's better when she can't control things," she said quietly. "We're all better when we stop trying to control things we were never meant to hold." I looked at my granddaughter, so full of potential, sitting in the house her grandmother had secretly provided, holding the notebook that contained her wisdom. The foundation was not just holding, it was now the launch pad for a new generation. The weeks that followed were a quiet revelation.
Chloe blossomed in Savannah. She enrolled in the university, and her passion for the city's architecture was a joy to watch. She would come home in the evenings, her notebook filled with sketches of ironwork, detailed drawings of window casings, and notes on the history of the buildings she was studying. The house was filled with her energy, her laughter, and the scent of the turpentine she used for her drawings. It was no longer just my house, it was our home. Meanwhile, 2,000 miles away, a slow, almost imperceptible thaw was beginning. I didn't push for it. I didn't demand it. I simply left the door open, just a crack, and waited to see if they would walk through it. The first sign came from Sarah. She started sending me pictures, not of her perfect house or her professional achievements, but small, simple things. A picture of a particularly beautiful sunset from her office window, a photo of a dog that looked like the one we had when she was a little girl. And then, one Sunday, a photo of a slightly lopsided, clearly homemade apple pie. The caption read, "It's not as good as Grandma's, but I'm practicing." I showed the picture to Chloe. She smiled. "That's more than she said in years, Grandpa." I wrote back to Sarah, keeping it simple. "It looks delicious. Eleanor would be proud." Kevin was a tougher nut to crack. His emails were still terse, but the anger was gone, replaced by a kind of weary emptiness. He told me about a real estate deal that had fallen through, about a client who was demanding the impossible. He was complaining, but for the first time, he wasn't blaming me for his problems. He was just talking. Then one day, he sent me a link to an online article. It was about a master craftsman in North Carolina who specialized in restoring old woodwork. The email had only one line. "Thought you might find this interesting." It was a small gesture, almost insignificant, but it was an acknowledgement of who I was, a builder, a craftsman, not just an old man sitting on a valuable piece of property. It was a peace offering disguised as a shared interest. The biggest surprise came on a Tuesday afternoon. A large flat box arrived from a courier. It was from Kevin. I opened it cautiously. Inside was the detailed, carved model of the lake I had made for him all those years ago, the one he had dismissed as quaint. It had been cleaned and polished. A small brass plaque was affixed to the base. It was engraved with 2 words, "I'm sorry." I stood there in the hallway of my Savannah home, holding this returned, redeemed gift, and felt the last wall of anger in my heart crumble. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. Trust once broken is a difficult thing to rebuild, but it was a bridge. A fragile, tentative bridge, but one that could, perhaps, one day be crossed.
That evening, I emailed both of them. I didn't mention the apologies or the gifts. I just sent them a picture Chloe had taken of me and Isabella, sitting in the walled garden, laughing, with a bottle of wine on the table between us. I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to see that my life was not over. I wanted them to see that I was happy. And I wanted them to understand, without me having to say a word, that my happiness was no longer dependent on their approval. It was my own, built on a new foundation, in a new city, under the warm southern sun. The picture I sent seemed to unlock something. It wasn't a picture of defiance or wealth. It was a picture of simple, quiet contentment. And for my children, who had spent their adult lives chasing a frantic, high-stakes version of happiness, it must have been like looking at a foreign language they suddenly, dimly, began to understand. Sarah called the next day. "Dad," she said, and her voice was different. The polished PR professional was gone. In her place was just my daughter. "That garden, it looks beautiful. You look happy." "I am happy, Sarah," I said. "The woman in the picture with you, Isabella, she seems nice." "She is," I said. "She was a good friend to your mother." There was a long pause. "Dad, I know it's too late for a lot of things, and I know sorry is just a word, but I want to try to be better." She took a shaky breath. "Chloe told me about the trust. At first I was angry, and then I was relieved. It was the right thing to do, Dad. It's what Mom would have done." This confession, so freely given, was the one I hadn't known I was waiting for. It was an acknowledgement of my judgment, a validation of Eleanor's wisdom. "Thank you for saying that, Sarah," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. The conversation with Kevin a few days later was less emotional, but in its own way, just as significant. He didn't mention the model of the lake, and neither did I. We didn't need to. Instead, he asked me about the house in Savannah. "What's it like?" he asked, a genuine curiosity in his voice. "The architecture, I mean. Is it one of those old federal-style places?" For the next half hour, we talked, not as father and estranged son, but as two men who understood the language of buildings. I described the detailed plasterwork on the ceilings, the way the original heart pine floors creaked, the clever design of the pocket doors. He listened intently, asking smart questions about the foundation and the roofline. He wasn't talking about market value. He was talking about structure. He was talking about the things that last. Before we hung up, he said, his voice a little awkward, "You know, Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe this summer, if you'd have us, Sarah and I could come down to the mountain house. Not to talk about selling, just to fix that loose railing on the back porch. Like we used to." Like we used to. 4 simple words that held a world of meaning. An offer not of money, but of time. An offer of shared work. An offer to repair something that was broken. I'd like that, Kevin. I'd like that very much. That night, I sat with Chloe in the garden. I told her about her mother's phone call and her uncle's offer. She listened, her young face serious in the twilight. "People can change, can't they, Grandpa?" she asked. "They can," I said, looking up its magnolia tree, its leaves dark against the evening sky. "But it's slow work, and you can't force it. You just have to build a strong foundation and hope they find their way back to it." She opened her grandmother's notebook, which had become her constant companion. She flipped to a blank page, and in her neat architectural script, she wrote a new heading: "Blueprints for Forgiveness." Underneath, she drew a small, simple sketch of a porch railing. It was just a beginning, a single line on an empty page, but for the first time, it felt like a future we could all build together. That summer, they came. Kevin and Sarah drove up to the house in the Blue Ridge Mountains, not with lawyers or real estate agents, but with toolboxes and groceries. It was awkward at first. We moved around each other cautiously, like strangers learning a new dance. But then Kevin picked up a hammer, and the awkwardness began to melt away. We spent 2 days working on the house together. We fixed the porch railing, we replaced a rotted window frame, we cleared the gutters. We worked in a comfortable silence, the shared language of physical labor bridging the gap that words could not. In the evenings, Sarah cooked, filling the house with aromas that hadn't been there since Eleanor was alive. She didn't try to make her mother's recipes. She made her own, and they were delicious. We ate on the porch, watching the fireflies light up the dusk. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. We were too busy building a new present. When they left, Sarah hugged me tightly. "We'll be back soon, Dad," she said, and I knew she meant it. Kevin just clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was more eloquent than any apology. "The foundation's solid, Dad," he said, looking at the house. "You built it well." I now split my time between my 2 homes.
I spend the warm summers in the cool air of my mountain house, tending Eleanor's garden and watching the mist roll through the valleys. My neighbor Martha brings me fresh vegetables, and we sit on her porch and talk about the old days. Kevin and Sarah visit often. They bring their own families now. The house is once again filled with the sound of grandchildren's laughter. When the first chill of autumn arrives, I pack my bags and head south to the gentle warmth of Savannah. Chloe is thriving there. Her work is brilliant, and she has fallen in love with the city just as her grandmother did. She has her own apartment now, but she spends most weekends at the townhouse, which she calls Grandma's Embassy. We spend our Sundays exploring the historic district, visiting Isabella at her bookstore, or just sitting in the walled garden, reading and talking. I have found a balance I never thought possible. My life is not defined by one place, but by the beautiful, sturdy bridge that connects them. It's a bridge built of memory, forgiveness, and the quiet, unshakable love of a family that almost lost its way, but managed to find its way back home. Eleanor's oak box now sits on the mantelpiece in Savannah. I opened her letter one last time and added a note of my own at the bottom. My dearest Eleanor, the foundation you built is holding strong. It's supporting more than just a house now. It's supporting a family. Our children have learned to measure wealth in time and shared work. And our granddaughter is building beautiful things. You were right. You just have to give them a new map. Thank you for trusting me to be the map maker.
My story had its share of heartbreak and betrayal, but it ended with healing and hope. Life is about foundations, the ones we inherit and the ones we build for ourselves. Thank you for listening to my journey. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to fight to protect something you love? Share your experience. We can all learn from each other's strength. The other day, Chloe and I were sitting in Forsyth Park, watching the fountains spray rainbows into the afternoon light. She was sketching in her grandmother's notebook, a look of intense concentration on her face. "What are you drawing?" I asked. She turned the notebook towards me. It wasn't a building. It wasn't a blueprint. It was a drawing of two houses, the rustic cabin in the mountains and the elegant townhouse in Savannah. A winding, scenic road connected them. And along the road she had drawn small figures. Me, her mother, her uncle, and even a tiny smiling sketch of Isabella. Above the drawing she had written the title, The Foundation. "It's not finished," she said. "I keep adding things." "That's the best kind of plan," I said. "The kind that has room to grow." A few weeks ago, I received a package in the mail. It was from Kevin. Inside was a framed photograph. It was an old picture of him and me, taken 30 years ago, when we had just finished building the deck on the back of the mountain house. We were both covered in sawdust, grinning at the camera, our arms around each other's shoulders. Tucked into the back of the frame was a check. It wasn't a large amount, but it was significant. A note attached said, "For the Chloe Miller Future Architects Fund. The first of many. Love. Kevin." I had to sit down. My son, who had once measured life in commissions and market values, was now investing in his niece's dreams. He wasn't just fixing railings anymore. He was helping to build her future. Sarah, too, has found her own way of making amends. She has started a small pro bono program at her PR firm to help local artists and craftsmen, people like me, market their work. She calls it the Eleanor Project. She told me it's the most fulfilling work she's ever done. My life is full now, in a way I never could have imagined in those dark days after Eleanor died. It is a life lived in two places, balanced between the mountains and the sea, between solitude and family, between the past and the future. I have two homes, but I'm not divided. I am whole. Sometimes, late at night, when the house in Savannah is quiet and the scent of magnolia drifts in through the open window, I take out Eleanor's notebook. I don't read her words anymore. I know them by heart. Instead, I turn to the very last page. She had left it completely blank. For a long time, I didn't know what to do with it. But now I do.
It's not for me to write on. That page is for Chloe. It's for her children and their children after them. It's a space for the next chapter, the unwritten future of a family that learned how to rebuild itself from the foundation up. Eleanor didn't just leave me houses and money. She left us a story. And the best part is, it's a story that's still being written, one small, brave, and beautiful line at a time. The house is not just a structure of wood and stone. It is a living thing, a testament to the enduring power of love and the quiet, stubborn resilience of the human heart. And on that unwritten page, there is space for everything.